Hi, and welcome to this lecture on Adobe Illustrator from Eduonix Technologies. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about working with multiple documents and managing documents. So as you can see, I have two documents open. And if you've been paying attention in the other videos, this document has multiple artboards inside of it. So this is pretty useful if you like to have everything in one place, especially. I showed you how to create multiple artboards when you're setting up a new document. You merely just enter in the number, and you can change the orientation there too. However, there is a much easier way, simply by drawing shapes and converting them to artboards actively while you're in your document. So there's a different way to create artboards, and one which you might find more useful. We have this 3-page Illustrator document, and it's really 3 separate documents inside of one. Now, if you look really closely, whenever I click on an artboard, it selects it. I'll zoom in, and I'm going to take it off the pixel preview for right now. So you can see it puts a faint black line around the artboards whenever I click on one. That would be the active artboard. You don't need to click on it before you start working on it. However, you do need to click on it for other reasons, like saving. So I'm going to create some shapes on each one. So as you know, we set this up in the new document settings. Selected the number of artboards. This is what you want to do if you're creating 3 documents and they're all relevant to each other. They're all the same project. So for example, my incredibly informative 3-page brochure is going to have some shapes on it. Let's say I wanted to add a 4th page to this. I'm actually going to draw the page out. Like we talked about Smart Guides earlier, as you can see Smart Guides working, and I'll zoom in a little bit too. I'm going to do 2 things that I haven't done before. One of them is show you the Smart Guides in action. If I start my square right here, it's going to be lined up with the top bleed of the bottom artboard, which would be the 3rd page. If I start my box right here, which I'm going to want to start it in this horizontal line somewhere, it's going to be lined up with my other artboard. Now it doesn't really matter where you start these, but I like to keep it all nice, and I wanted to show you Smart Guides. Now, right now if I were to click, it would be lined up with that bleed up there and the top of the artboard to the left. But what I want is for it to be in the same position just like the other ones. So I'm going to hover until I get this intersect, which means it's going to be, the top left corner is going to be right where it needs to be. So I'm just going to click without dragging with the square tool. This is another way to create squares. I'm going to select my dimensions, 8.5 by 11, and it's automatically going to put in the bleeds. But not until I turn this into an artboard. So let's say the 4th page of this document I created in the extra workspace over here, because that's where it is essentially. It's not on any artboards. And I want to make this into an artboard. I didn't do that ahead of time, so how do you do that? It's pretty simple. So I'm going to want to go up to Object, down to artboards. Now there's two options that you use the most here. The one that we're going to use is convert to artboards, which will create a new artboard. It's the exact same size of the shape. The only thing is, it can only be a rectangle, of course, which I'll show you in a second what that means when you're creating artboards from shapes that aren't rectangles. But right now we're going to go to fit to selected art. Now, if you notice, I have this artboard selected right here. It's the black one. So Illustrator is saying this is the artboard you're on. So when I have this shape selected with this artboard selected and I go to fit to selected art, it's going to change over here to this artboard. I can delete the shape right now if I wanted to, and you can see that it's an artboard. So basically, whatever artboard you have selected, it will create a new artboard and get rid of the original one. I'm actually going to go up to Object, Artboards, and Convert to Artboards, because I want a new artboard and I want to keep the existing one. So as you can see, I have 4 artboards now. So I've showed you how to create an artboard, but I used a rectangle. So let's use a different shape, and we'll see what happens when you turn it into an artboard. Let's use a star, for example. We go up to Object, Artboards, Fit to Selected Art, and if we zoom in here, you can see that it made it just big enough to fit the entire shape. These anchors, as you can see from the Smart Guide, are right on the edge. So being able to make your artboards after you've made your art is actually a really useful thing to be able to do. You're not limited by the boundaries and the color. You're not limited by any of the predefined things that come with artboards or a piece of paper, for example. Some of the later tutorials in this learning course are actually going to be centering around creating real art, not just using little examples like shapes like this. And I will be using that method. I suggest you give it a try. You might find that you really like it. So in the Object menu, there's actually a lot of stuff for artboards. If you go to Object, Artboards, Rearrange Artboards, there's a handy little tool that we can define the layout, the columns, and the spacing between the columns. Now pay attention to the layout, the direction the arrow was going, as that will be the numbering of your artboards, and the numbering of your artboards is important whenever you're exporting. Because the whole purpose of having artboards, multiple ones on a page, would be to export multiple files at one time. So, by the way, look at all the different options you have for exporting in Illustrator. This is a vector editing program, but you have a lot of raster options, which is great. So we're going to first click Use Artboards, which is going to enable these two options. In the range, let's say if we want to print this one, we're going to type in 3 because we had it set to the Z layout. Oops, 3. And we're going to get that guy right there. We're going to click, and that's it. It'll automatically save number 3. Now if you put 1 to 3, it would save the first 3. And if you chose 2, 4, it would it'd export 2 and 4. Obviously you can have more than just 4 artboards too, so all in all this is a pretty useful thing. You could have as many artboards you want. You've seen how large the total area, the drawing area is, and Illustrator doesn't use a lot of memory or speed, so you could put together a whole book in this fashion. But let's exit out of this so that we can take another look at artboards. Go up to the File menu and create a new document. It's good to practice. Plus, pretty much the entire new document window refers to the artboard in some form or another. First, you have all your options that you had in the other artboard windows that we looked at, although I don't like to define mine right at first. You also have some nuance like orientation. Of course, it's way easier just to make artboards from already existing shapes, still in my opinion. However, sometimes we have to design something specifically, so obviously this is a good thing to go over. And by this point, you pretty much know most of the new document window. And don't worry, by the end you'll know the entire thing. So I'm going to go into the final thing that we're going to cover in this particular video right now, and that's view and different view settings, how to arrange the windows. It's kind of like working with artboards, except they're in individual documents. Each particular method has its own purpose. Sometimes you need to save things for individual people. Obviously, I'm not talking about different clients. I'm talking about maybe you're distributing something to a lot of people, because we're going to have all these open at the same time. If you notice, I had already opened up 4 new document windows. So, I also want to show you the interactions between objects in these windows. One thing you should take note of right off the bat is that each document is going to have its own view settings, which is a benefit to using individual documents. Although you can memorize view settings and save them, the documents do it automatically just from being up and you using them. So it's something to keep in mind if you're deciding whether or not you want all these pieces you're going to do in one file, which isn't necessarily as helpful as it seems. In terms of computers, you don't really lose files if you have too many of them, really. You just put them all in the folder. So, but here's how you make this arrangement even better. And that's going to arrange. And you have some options here. Let's choose tile. And then it's pretty much like having the 4 artboards from before with a little bit more control. And everything's going to have its own set of layers. This is important, even though we haven't gone into layers yet. Also, everything keeps its own view settings. That's done automatically, like I already mentioned. So, let's just take a look at how objects interact between all these different artboards. You can drag things directly from one window into the other. And I said artboards, I meant windows. This is the way I actually prefer to work for all the control that it gives you. Especially because it saves the view settings. Also, I like the ability to... I don't like defining my artboards every time, honestly. You have to count them, especially if you have a lot, and I can't count very high. That concludes this lesson of Adobe Illustrator. As we go deeper into the course, we're going to get into more and more interesting stuff. So stay tuned, stay with it, it'll be fun.